All right, we are live. Um, we're gonna get started here in just a few minutes. Give some people time to jump in here at some point, and we're just gonna wait about 5 minutes, and then we'll get started. I wanted to say happy birthday, uh, Greg. I want to say happy birthday to you. Today
Thank
is
you.
Greg's birthday, and what all did you do today? Tell us while we're waiting for it to get started. Tell us what you did today while we're getting people in here.
Well, I just had a simple, small birthday. Nothing extravagant. Just want to spend time with my family. I came up to my family's home. Uh,
Wow.
Spent the day together. Had dinner. It was a really good day.
Yeah. Welcome in, everybody. We're just waiting a few more minutes, and then we're going to get started. Give some people. Oh, hey, there's Dad's in there. Hey, Dad. Hi, Dad's in here. Hey, Dad. Good. Thank you, Dad, for joining us. This is you get. We're in for a good show tonight. Great show tonight, Dad. Um, Excellent show. Uh,
Thank you, Ken.
but at any rate, I I'm glad. I'm really glad that you got to see your folks today. That's stellar.
Absolutely.
All right. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes, and we'll get rocking out. Dad wants to know. Dad's asking, what is the weather like in New Hampshire?
Cold. Very cold. uh, right now, I'm in northern New Hampshire. It's about 38 degrees now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been cold this week. I just kind of miss the summer now, like when it was 90 degrees, and now it's frigid.
Yeah, I bet it's cold. It's cold down here, but I'm not going to complain about it.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I remember when I was down there, it was probably like in the 60s. That's not too bad.
Yeah,
But I was told by a coworker of mine that we're probably going to get walloped with snow this year.
that's what I heard. I heard that the meteorological forecast for this winter is going to be pretty brutal. Up, just starting just a little ways north, right above South Carolina, kind of in a angular right that goes a line that goes over South Carolina and kind of cuts through Georgia. And that's what I saw when I was looking at uh, one of my favorite forecasters. But I want to welcome everybody who's come in the last couple of minutes. Again, I'm today. If you have any questions for us or our guest, Nicholas Pouliot, please enter your question in all caps if it's a question. If not, you can just type however you want to. But that we'll get to your questions uh, in due time. I just want to thank all of you for coming in. Who's come in already? This is going to be an exciting show. So. Um, I guess we can go. We'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to What Lies Beyond, exploring the edges of known reality and the fringe. And I'm really excited today because we have I'm going to introduce our special guest here in just a few moments. We're going to get started with him. But I want to thank all of you who have come in here and thank you for being here. And but we're gonna have a good time tonight. We're definitely gonna have a good time. And Greg, today is Greg's birthday. If you don't wish him well wishes for that, that'd be awesome. You can comment that in the chat. We are going to be monitoring the chat, so um, we want you to be a part of this podcast. What Lies Beyond is not just myself and Greg and our potential guests in the future. It's also you're also part of it. And we're really glad to have you and thankful to have all of you. Anybody who has time to check out, stop by and chat and listen to our conversation. And so we're really thankful to have you. But at any rate, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Let's talk. Our guest today is Nick Pouliot, and he is a historian and a Civil War reenactor, and we're going to talk about the haunted history of Gettysburg. We're going to talk about the battle itself in detail because I want everybody to have a firm understanding of what led what it, the pivotal moments in this battle that and then we're going to ease into the paranormal fallout that ensued afterwards. And it is considered by many, according to my research, one of the most haunted places in the world. It is absolutely dead on with that, no pun intended. um, but at any rate, we're going to Michael. Unfortunately, Michael, he's very sick. Please keep him in your thoughts and prayers. He's not able to be with us this evening. He's kind of sitting out. And but at any rate, I'm kind of all over the place. He's got a master's degree in library sciences, and he's got a degree in history, and colonization to Reconstruction specifically. And I can't think of a better individual that's more qualified to talk about this stuff. So without further ado, I give you Nick Pouliot. Pouliot. I'm sorry for butchering your name again.
No, you're good. You're good. How's it going? Happy
It's
birthday,
going great.
Greg. I'm sorry I didn't realize it was your birthday today.
Thank you.
Facebook
Nick,
did not alert me like I use it predominantly to warn me of other people's birthdays as well.
we're so
Oh, no.
glad to have you, brother. Thank you for taking your time out. And this is a really special day. Not only do I get, I've always wanted to do an interview like this. Number one. Number two, it's Greg's birthday, so it's my brother's birthday here, and I'm just really glad to have both of you with me tonight, and I'm excited about this. And but before we really get in deep with this conversation, Nick, why don't you tell our audience more about and listeners more about you and your background and why you got into the field research of history and whatnot. Give us a rundown.
Yeah, so until I was about 12, 13, I actually hated history, except for maybe some ancient Greek, ancient Roman stuff. Uh, and then my family decided let's go to Gettysburg for summer vacation. I have family from northeastern PA, so we picked up my great grandmother and then we headed down there. And we got down there. I was in a bad mood, probably because I was car sick. Being in a car
I'll do it.
for 8, 10 hours. I'm the oldest of three boys, so you have three kids in a car. 8 hours doesn't typically go super smoothly. But we got there, we got the self audio tour, and we started going around the battlefield. And one of the first stops that I remember, at least, and it might be one of the first ones, is um, I can't remember the name of the woods, where General Reynolds, when he finally arrived with the First and the 11th Corps behind him, it's the spot right where Reynolds was killed, where he was shot by Confederate troops. And there's this beautiful monument to him and then the rest of the men of the First Corps, which he commanded. And so we pull up, we're in a minivan, the door slides open, everybody else gets out, and I'm in the back taking my time. I don't want to be here. And then I got out and I was like, okay, this is kind of real. Like there was, 4,000 men in this area fighting for hours. And then this guy who's on this statue on a horse was shot and killed. Like, what's the big deal? Um, and then after that, I was like, all right, this Civil War history thing is kind of cool. I'm pretty sure we watched the movie Gettysburg, which if you haven't seen it, very good.
Oh
Just
man,
ignore the melting beards. Um,
man, that
and
was a great movie.
and
That was a great movie,
oh,
no
it's
doubt, man.
great. You don't want to watch it with a historian though, because they'll point out all the inaccuracies.
I
Mm.
did.
But
My dad.
comparatively, it's very good. Fremantle, the British Coldstream Guard guy, he was not in his regimentals, because guess what? You don't want the guys to know you're there. So he was in civilian clothes the whole time. But for
Right.
a movie, um, you can change things like that.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
I've watched that so many times. July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd every year, I watch each portion of the movie. My whole family does it. So after we got home from that trip, YouTube, I believe, was still in its infancy, or at least for me, and started looking up Civil War reenacting videos. And I was doing my own research on which units I could join, units nearby. I found one unit. They never got back to me. So lucky for myself, I guess, and the unit that I am with. I've been with them for 13 and a half, 14 years now. Um, Found them, bunch of great guys. I've Some of them are my best friends, and it's something I never would have met them any other way, which is really cool. And like I'm going to be going down to Gettysburg with a bunch of them actually Thursday morning, very early Thursday morning for Remembrance Day, which ties into the Battle of Gettysburg because it's the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address when Lincoln dedicated the first national cemetery ever. So Arlington wasn't a thing until the toward the end of the war or the end of the war. I can't remember exactly, but Arlington Cemetery was not a thing right away.
Right.
It's a newer than the Gettysburg National Battle Cemetery.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I've never I haven't actually been to the battlefield. I think my dad and I have in the past have talked about visiting. I don't know if my dad has actually been there. Dad, if you're with us, hit us up in the chat. Let us know if you've been there. But anyway, that sounds really cool. I've been. I've been to Kennesaw one
Mhm.
time. I think I've been to Kennesaw, and I've been very close to Vicksburg, Mississippi. My family, we're from South Mississippi, the state of Mississippi.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, that's really cool. You seem to like. I remember when the movie Gettysburg came out. I want to kind of jump back to that for a second, real quick. My Ronald F. Maxwell made a great film. He
Mhm.
made an incredible film. I remember my dad taking me to the theater to see this film, and it was the longest movie. It's one of the longest movies ever made, I think.
Yeah, it's like 4 hours, and on a DVD, at least when they first came out, you had to flip the DVD.
Yeah,
I'm sure there was two VHS tapes for it. So
there
yeah,
was it was a two VHS because I remember we bought it right after we got it through Columbia House.
Yeah,
okay,
I heard that it was supposed to be a television series, but eventually ended up on the big screen instead.
yeah,
Oh, and your dad
Interesting.
just commented. He said, "Yes, June 2012 walked tickets charged from Confederate perspective."
Wow,
okay.
thank you, Dad.
That's a
I
long
never got.
march too.
Yeah, yeah, man. My dad is so cool. Like when I was a kid, I have some really fond memories of my dad telling me about all these about he told me a lot about the Civil War when I was little. And even at a young age, I kind of got interested. I was like, wow, this is kind of neat.
Mhm.
I didn't know all this stuff happened. To form the country as to what it is today.
Well,
Um,
especially you're in a place, I've born and raised in New Hampshire. Um, Civil War is all around you down there. Up
Mm.
here, the closest thing Civil War related is actually St. Albans, Vermont. Which fun little fact, that is the most northern action, not battle, but event that happened during the war because some Confederates got into Canada and said, "We're going to rob a bank to get money for the war effort." So they went to
Mhm.
St. Albans, Vermont, and Greg can correct me if I'm wrong or if he knows. I believe one person was killed, and they stole like $1,000, $2,000 worth of money, which was a lot more back then, but still like wasn't going to fund the war effort by any means. Um,
Right. I
right.
mean, like by
Wow.
1800s, though. I mean, that's
I didn't
quite a
know that.
amount of money, though.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's still a ton, but they
Yeah.
buy some rifles but it's not going to change anything. But it
No.
scared the crap out of the people, obviously, because oh my God, there's people come from Canada now. Like now we have to worry about New England.
Wow. So so you're do I guess did your degrees that you got do you think they kind of shaped your decision? Did that spur really jumpstart your interest in war history, especially Civil War? Do you think that had an impact on it in any way?
I was definitely very much into it before, but it definitely reinforced it. It did not deteriorate it anyways. I got more into the Revolutionary War. I went to Keene State College, and there were some great professors for the American Rev War. Very good, and I was taking like senior level courses or those upper level courses um, just to take the classes with them when I didn't really need to. I got more into Napoleon. I like that earlier time frame. Um, One professor that I had, he was born in Nazi Germany to American parents, um, and he had some really cool stories. I took a World War II class with him, and it was interesting to take the class from somebody who actually lived a lot of it, and his dad was involved with the OSS um, later on, and he was able to tell him later
Wow.
on before he died. But with like, because he knew where the factories were in Germany, he knew what the factories built, so he was helping guide or tell the bombers where to go when we were bombing Germany and Dresden and all that other stuff. And this guy, I mean, he was like 4 or 5 years old. He was in England. He was in London for the VE parade. So like hearing him talk and something that really stuck out to me that he said was, and other historians have said it, you can't study history for at least 70 years, properly study it, because um, like something that I'm like coming to terms with, it's like I remember 9/11 happening. I was 7 years old,
I was
seven and a half.
in infantry school at Fort Benning, right
Yeah,
in the middle
so
of the infantry school.
so you remember that very vividly. I I remember it. I remember being young. I didn't understand, but I knew something bad was happening. And then you have kids nowadays that are born and learning about it in school.
Right.
Um, but you have to wait until pretty much everybody that is like a generation or two away from that in order to be able to more properly or get a less biased opinion on what happened. Hopefully, um,
Yeah,
you know, the victor always writes the story, but
Mhm.
maybe you can find some sources in the attic somewhere hidden.
you
And
know that's it. I that's interesting. You just said that because part of my philosophy is I think we should always remember our past. I don't think we should erase our past. I think we should always remember what happened so we never repeat these mistakes again, and make sure they're never repeated again. I find that interesting.
mhm.
But at any rate, Nick, if you, I think take a deep dive into the battle itself. Let's start shortly before the battle ensued, and let's go from there. If they are okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. We'll jump back a little bit earlier, actually.
Okay.
So we'll start off with the war starts in December, or not December, technically December 1860. Fort Sumter is fired on in South Carolina. South Carolina militias, they've declared themselves to secede. So they fire on Fort Sumter after asking very politely multiple times for the garrison to leave. They don't. It's federal property, so they're decide they're going to stay. They try to be relieved once. Lincoln sends in a relief ship. The ship gets fired on, turns back because it's a supply ship. It's not. It can't go up against artillery, especially artillery up on the heights. Um, Anyways, Fort is eventually surrendered, taken over. Everything is going great, quote unquote. In April, the first battle happens at, depending on what part of the country you're from, north or south. First Bull Run for the north. If you're from south, it's first Manassas. I generally say Manassas anyways. It sounds better than Bull Run. Um, but that's the first battle. There's a little bit of mythology, and everybody came out to come and watch it. And there were people coming to watch it. They were from far away because they're up on the hills, so they weren't being run over by soldiers retreating.
They were
But
having like a picnic watching this.
oh
What
yeah, and
weren't
I
they?
mean, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, let's go watch cricket if you're in England, or
Yeah.
let's go party and hang out. So battle goes rather poorly for the federal forces. Um, so fast forward a little bit, wars continuing on. and we'll focus just specifically on the Eastern Theater because Gettysburg is in Pennsylvania, so that's in the eastern portion of the military campaigns. So between April 61 to June 62, it's relatively a back and forth. It's very steady, not a lot going on. Forces are being built up. Um, Lee eventually takes command of the Confederate forces outside of Richmond in 1862, end of May, beginning of June. So he's given command of the forces outside of Richmond. And Lee, funny enough, he decides I need to dig entrenchments and I need to wait and build up my forces here. That is something that Lee is not known to do at any other point in the war until the very end when he knows the end is coming. Um, Lee is a very aggressive strategist, as we learn later on. He's really good at what he does, but the problem is the South doesn't have the manpower, the population power that the North does. Um, it's like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 that the um, states staying in the um, Union have compared to the South. So Lee is finally given command of the Confederate Army in the Eastern Theater, at least in Virginia. Excuse me. Which, when he takes over, it's at the 7 Days Battle. 7 Days Battles. It's named so easily because there was 7 days of fighting. We're very creative with our names. So that ends the Peninsula Campaign. He fights from the end of June to July 1st. He pushes McClellan, who is the commanding federal general. He is a brilliant, brilliant logistical person. He is one of the worst military commanders we've had because he thinks that Lee has 2 to 3 times more troops than he actually has. Lee has probably about 70,000 at the absolute most troops with him at this time, and he's not going to take them all out of Richmond because he doesn't want somebody sneaking in the back door and taking the Confederate capital. Um, it's like capture a flag. You take the capital, war's over. Doesn't matter if you capture all the other armies or not. So McClellan is always inflating Lee's numbers, and Lincoln, after the 7 Days battles, which ends the Peninsula Campaign because they're coming off one of the peninsulas in Virginia, Lincoln says, "To hell with you, McClellan, you're done." So Lee has shown his aggressiveness here. He's gone from, I don't know the exact directions and distance, but he pushes McClellan out down to the peninsula, through the peninsula, and off of it. So now McClellan's having to retreat and go back up more north, retreating mostly by boat to DC. So now Lee is like, hey, I can take on these guys. They don't know what they're doing. They're mostly inept. Um, when the war started, most of the officer corps for the Federal Army, or what was then the Federal Army, actually went to the South. So even though most of them, a large portion of them had experience from the Mexican American War, um, Longstreet, Grant, Hancock, Armistead, all those guys were all buddies. They all fought down at Chapultepec and Mexico City. They all had experience. Um,
Wow, I didn't
so
know that. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. Grant was Grant was a captain, I believe. Longstreet was known. These guys did work down there, so they know they knew what they were doing. And Lee um, was involved down there a little bit, I think, but he also helped put down John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry, going back to 58, 59, I think, Greg, right
I
around
think
there.
so. Yeah.
Um, and Lee actually commanded a detachment of Marines to take down John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry, and one of his good friends coming up in the war, Jeb Stuart, who is a brilliant cavalry commander, um, was there with him as well. But jumping back to 1862, um, McClellan is now off the peninsula. Lee says, "This is my time. I need to strike. This is my time." So he decides to take his army from Northern Virginia. They're named the Army of Northern Virginia because the Confederates named their armies after their regions. The Federal Army names their uh, armies after rivers nearby, generally speaking. So Lee invades Maryland, and he starts shooting up. He gets to Antietam, and then that is where he's a little bit spread out and ends up engaging with federal forces. Um, it's the single bloodiest day in American history. Um, it helps. Then now you have to think, just like with anything else, statistics wise, numbers can always say whatever you want them to, but it's the bloodiest day in American history because Confederates and federal forces, they're both American. But
Right.
regardless, it's still the
Exactly.
bloodiest day in American history. Single bloodiest day. 13,000 men are killed, wounded. So that's huge.
That's horrible. That's so tragic too.
Yeah, and
You
I
know,
mean, it is not small numbers. This is not, um, people are disintegrated because they get hit by cannonballs, and it's not just the physical human life that is lost. These battlefields are miles long, so these people's livelihoods that they couldn't care one way or the other half the time, whether they were Confederate or Union, especially the poorer people, they just wanted to go about their lives.
right.
And now their corn crop is destroyed. Now they have all these bodies. Maybe it's dark to think about, but yeah, maybe crops will grow better next year because decomposing bodies and things, but their area is destroyed. Um, so Antietam, it's known as a stalemate. It's a tactical Union victory though, because Lincoln was able to show, hey, we can actually do something. We can slow the Confederates down. Um, so because of the Battle of Antietam, and at the end of the year in December, and then going into January 63, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which frees slaves in Confederate-controlled territory, which then changes the war effort goes from just preserving the Union to preserving the Union and freeing the slaves and beginning to give rights to these people. Um, Lincoln
And
had really wanted to do that toward the beginning of the war, but he knew he couldn't do that right away. Um, and Lincoln's thoughts on abolitionism are never fully known. He was slightly pro colonization of sending freed African Americans to Liberia, and but he never actually fully says what he wanted to do. So most people think this is what he wanted, but he needs a reason. Otherwise, he could lose a large portion of his war effort due to people not wanting uh, these slaves to be free or whatnot. So Antietam is a stalemate. Everybody falls back a bit. They do some more fighting, and that's in September. December comes around. Now we're in Fredericksburg, Virginia. There's a new man in charge of the Federal Army. His name is Burnsides. Anybody here have sideburns? Um,
besides,
it is attributed to him. He had these big mutton chops, um, beard, and he is a brilliant division and corps commander, but he is a terrible uh, army general, leading the army itself. He turned it down at least a couple of times, and then Lincoln finally said, "Well, you're taking the job, damn it." So he kind of had to take the job. So he decides the Confederates are up on this nice hill, nice big hill, and there's a town in front of them, and there's this river. Well, he says, "Well, the Confederates are up there. We're over here. I have to fight them." That doesn't go very well when the Confederates are on the heights and in the city. So he says, "Well, let's build some pontoons." The uh, Army Corps of Engineers, they were around back then. They started building a pontoon bridge. They were being shot while they were building a bridge, probably like they always have been, getting shot at while doing their stuff. Eventually, federal forces are able to take the other side of the river. They take the town with not too much fighting, but there's street fighting. Civilians are still in the town, by the way, and we decided not to shell the town because there's civilians in there. The Civil War is known as one of the first total wars, so it eventually gets to the point of doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you are, somebody's in that building, or there's that cow that you have. We're taking the cow. You know, war is everything at this point. So eventually they get through the town, and Burnside says, well, they're hiding up behind this nice stone wall. Let's send one division at a time to attack. So he sends one division, the whole division gets repulsed. He sends another division, they get repulsed, and he's hitting the whole line, but with one division across at a time. It's not working out very well. The only portion of the line to break through is actually General Meade, who comes in later with the Battle of Gettysburg. He starts to break through a little bit, but the Confederates have interior lines. If you know any military doctrine, you have interior lines, so usually your line will be shorter. You can transfer troops and supplies within those lines faster than the enemy can. So Lee was able to move troops. Um, there were three federal units that got very close to the rock wall, the stone wall. There's probably about they were within 100 yards easily. So they got there. There was the 5th New Hampshire. So I'm big into them because they're from New Hampshire. There was the 69th New York. They were an Irish Brigade unit. And then I can't remember the other unit. I think it was a Pennsylvania unit. But the battle was disastrous. Everybody ended up retreating back across the river. And so battle goes extremely poorly. Burnside is fired very soon after.
Wow. If you're just, let me stop for one
Yeah.
second, if you don't mind. For those of you who just tuned in, that we are doing, this is the haunted history of Gettysburg with our special guest, Nick Pouliot. Go ahead and continue. I just wanted to let people know what we're doing tonight because some people just entered the broadcast.
Sure.
So this is really building a lot of momentum towards the battle, one of the most pivotal battles in the history of the country, in my opinion.
Oh, easily. Yeah, Gettysburg and Vicksburg happened at the same time, and without the two of them happening, you can always play the what if game, but it would have been different for sure. So after Fredericksburg ends, we get to Chancellorsville in May '63, another extreme Union rout, and Lee splits up his forces. You don't want to do that, especially when you have the smaller army. General Jackson, Stonewall Jackson, who most people know, completely outflanks the Federal Army, sending it scattering. So Lee says now, I need to do something. The Confederate and Federal armies have been hanging out in the breadbasket of Virginia for way too long. The farmers need to be able to grow their crops. They need to take relief, and they need to relieve the area of just this mass of people. So Lee says, we're going to head north. I invaded once with the Battle of Antietam in the Maryland campaign. That went fairly well. I think I can do it again. So he starts booking it north, hanging on the western side of the Blue Mountains, and he sends Jeb Stuart, his cavalry corps commander, north to screen. So back then the cavalry would screen to hide the army, but they were also scouts. So the army is screening, and after a few days, the Federal Army realizes, hey, Rebs are going north. We need to go north too. But they're a couple days behind. They don't know exactly where to be going. Eventually, Confederates get into Pennsylvania. I can't remember if it's Carlisle or Hanover. One city is shelled by Confederate infantry. Um, and then this unknown town of Gettysburg is the place where everybody starts to converge. And the reason why people start to converge there, and if you look at a map now, you can easily see there's like 8 different roads that lead to Gettysburg. It's a crossroad. So back then you're traveling on roads, you're not just going to bushwhack everywhere. So there's 8 roads that come to one place. Where's everybody going to go? Right there. So you get to the Battle of Gettysburg. There's some Federal cavalry around, and after the Confederates have been through Gettysburg on the 29th, I believe, or the 30th. They've already been through town. People have fled. They didn't destroy the town or anything, but they looted some things, cattle and whatnot. And then they pulled out of the town. There's rumors, myths that they were looking for boots. Um, Fun fact: the Federal Army, your boots or your brogans, tended to last on average about 3 weeks, and these guys were marching 12 to 15 miles a day on average. Um, so that's not a lot. A lot of these guys would be walking virtually barefoot.
Yeah, I was going to say, I heard that especially in the Confederacy, that they a lot of them didn't even have shoes or boots. Like some people would march on their bare feet.
Yep, yeah, and I mean they would start off with shoes or boots because they'd have it, but if you don't have the industrial power, um, like the North did, but the North still you can only give guys shoes so often. And if the Confederates are 40 miles ahead of you, heading to D.C., they could be heading to New York. Who knows? You're not stopping to get a freaking pair of shoes. You're booking it. So eventually, Confederate forces start to come in towards Gettysburg, and this Federal cavalry that's there under General Buford says, "Well, we need to hold them." So he starts deploying his brigade out in a line. He stretches them out as far as he can in order to slow the Confederates coming in. Um, so the Federal Army is way behind them. They're probably at least 5 miles outside of town. The first elements, the front elements, um, because the Confederates had a couple days head start, and so you have all these crossroads. Um, Lee finds out that there is some sort of fight going on in Gettysburg. He's told it's a small skirmish of federal militia, Pennsylvania militia, so it shouldn't be a problem.
Is this where the battle kind of started gaining some momentum?
This is right where it starts. Yep.
Okay, I just want to provide a frame of reference for
Yeah.
myself and for our listeners.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the battle's starting to pick up. The Federal cavalry, they have breech loading rifles. So the main weapon of the time is a muzzle loading rifle. Um, Rifle's probably about 5 feet long. Um, you load it with a cartridge about yay big, powder, bullet. Excuse me. You have to pour the powder down, push the bullet in, take your ramrod out, ram the ball home, take the ramrod back out, return it, and then you put a cap on it. You're supposed to be able to
Wow.
fire 3 rounds a minute, 3 well-aimed shots a minute.
Yeah.
Um, I can do that, but also somebody's not shooting at me.
I would love to
Uh,
see a video of you rocking it out with one of those things.
I think
For real.
I definitely could. There's somebody that I know that can do it faster, and he can hit stuff. But you're supposed to be able to fire 3 well-aimed shots a minute with that. The cavalry has breech loaders, so they're able to quickly open up the breech, throw a round in, close it, cap it, bang. So they can shoot probably at least 6 rounds a minute. So they have twice the firepower easily, even though they have significantly less guys.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know anything. I had it makes me, looking back on things, it makes me I feel thankful that I had an M16A4. Man, it's amazing how weapons have progressed since
yep.
then. Wow.
Yeah, and you take your magazine out, you put another one in. All right, I'm good to
Right.
charge it. I'm good to go. And these guys are like, hold on a second, let me do this.
Yeah. Can you hold on 1 second? I'm
Yeah,
just going to load my rifle.
yeah.
Don't shoot me yet, though. Don't shoot me yet.
Well, so we're still fighting at this time the same exact way, virtually, that we fought in the American Revolution. Most people have seen the movie The Patriot. They're standing in lines
Oh
fighting.
man, what a great movie!
It's a
Great
great
movie.
movie. But unlike the one thing we decided to tweak because we're smarter now, I guess, um, even though the weapons are so much better, stronger, and we're fighting at the same ranges, we decide we're not going to take turns shooting at each other because that's not cool anymore. And
It's
it's not good.
madness.
Yeah, let me shoot you, and then okay, now it's your turn. That doesn't work,
No, it
especially
never
because you want to
has.
live. So we finally start. You shoot when you're told to shoot, and it's not let's take turns. It's throw as much lead at the other guy as you can, and hopefully they go down. Um, so anyways, Buford sends some troops back to General Reynolds. He's he's the head of the First Corps. The First Corps at this time is probably about maybe around 10,000 guys, probably a bit less. So Reynolds is running his troops up, virtually running his troops up as fast as he can, just to get into action because there's Confederates coming down off the hill that Buford is holding off, but he can't hold them forever. He's held them for most of the morning by this point, and then finally, I have some notes up here. That's why I'm looking.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Reynolds shows up with elements of the First and the 11th Corps. The 11th Corps does not have a good name at this point. They're called the Flying Dutchman. They're made up of a large amount of German immigrants. And at the Battle of Chancellorsville, um, and you have to give them a bit of a break because they were completely flanked and the army was completely routed. They just broke and fled. So, I probably would have broke and run too if I had, 40,000 Confederates coming up behind me. I mean, that's just the human thing to do. But they had a very bad rap in the army at this point. But anyways, they get up and there's some intense fighting um, in a lot of woods. There's Willoughby Woods, that's what it is, and there's Willoughby Run, which is a creek. There's an old railroad cut on the trying to think, I believe it's the east side of town. Um, and then there's this man named John Burns who lives in Gettysburg. He was arrested a couple days before when the Confederates had come through town because I think they took some of his cattle and he lost his mind and they threw him in jail. Anyways, he gets
Gosh,
out of jail when
that's
they
awful.
leave, and he's a War of 1812 vet. So this guy's seen action, and he decides, well, I'm definitely pissed at the Confederates. So he jumps in. He runs out there with his flintlock musket, like he used in 1812, 50 years earlier, and he falls in with a federal unit. He falls in with a part of the First Corps. So he eventually does grab a modern musket because he knows that's going to be better, and he grabs it off a wounded soldier. Um, so he fights for the first part of the day with the infantry, um, which is wild. This guy's 69 years old, but he's protecting his land, his property, and all that. So that's a pretty cool story. He does
Yeah.
get wounded, and he does survive. Thankfully, then there's pictures. I believe when Lincoln came to town in November that same year in '63, he met Lincoln, and but he's like a local hero down there. Um,
Hey, Facebook user, thanks for tuning in.
Hello. Uh, so Reynolds gets killed right by Willoughby Run. He gets shot. By that point, federal forces are starting to break, and they begin to break to the town and through the town. So you've got federal forces running through the town. They're being followed up by Confederate forces. There's probably about 30,000 Confederates now, and they outnumber the Federals. So
How many
it
do the
doesn't.
Federals have? Now, well, we're talking about the Union or the Feds. How many troops do they have at this point, converging on the town?
In the battle, they have about 20. They've got about 50 more. Hold on, I gotta check this number. I want to get that right. They have about 70,000 more coming up the road. And I mean, the road is like 30 miles long that they've got troops coming up, but they got 70,000 guys coming up. But it doesn't matter if you can't hold your position. Um, you know, if there's nobody left to save when you get there, there's nobody left to save.
Right.
So Federals pull back. They're able to be reorganized on top of Cemetery Hill. It's called Cemetery Hill because there's a cemetery on it. So they're able to fortify that on the outskirts of town.
That's spooky.
Confederates at the end of the day, yeah, I'd be terrified, but I guess it's a lot better than being on the field.
Yeah.
So they fall back to Cemetery Hill, set up fortifications, hunker down for the night. Confederates now own the eastern portion of town, and they hold the town. Um, so throughout the night, federal forces are coming up. They're coming in. The Second Corps, which is generally known in the Army of the Potomac, this federal army, is really the sledgehammer. They are, if you need stuff done, they're the ones you send in first. Um, They're the ones that broke through quite a bit at the Battle of Antietam, Fredericksburg. Their brigades were the ones that made it the closest to the stone wall. Um, Now if you're the sledgehammer, you tend to lose more guys. So the Second Corps was very beat up, but they were essentially crack troops. They were like shock troops.
Kind of like the Viking berserkers, kind of like that, something kind of
I
like that.
mean, yeah, I would say that the Fifth New Hampshire, who I'm with the reenacting unit, and also they're from New Hampshire. Um, they were part of the First Brigade, First Division, um, and they were always mentioned by their superior officers, their division, brigade, corps commanders, in official writings. One general said, "If I were to storm the gates of hell, I would have the Fifth New Hampshire as skirmishers." Um, that's a pretty bold thing to say. I don't think the gates of hell are penetrable. But if you're going to choose these guys to try and take it, that says something.
Yeah,
Whenever the First Corps went into action, um, especially their division, the division commander would move everybody else off the road in the division and send the 5th New Hampshire to the front to be the first guys in for their division for the Corps. So that says something not only about the regiment, but if you're not just going to send in one regiment by itself, you're sending in the whole brigade, the whole corps division. So that says a lot about the Second Corps in general. Um, so now day two starts. The Union Army is in the shape of a fishhook. If you think about the movie Gettysburg, they have it nice and drawn out for you.
right,
Um, Extends all the way from Cemetery Hill, and then it curves all the way down. The line is maybe about 2 miles long, down to the Round Tops, which are very famously made by the movie and the book
right.
Killer Angels, which the movie is based upon. Um,
My
but
dad's read that book. He said it's amazing.
oh, it's a great book. It it really puts into perspective a lot of things. Um, so now Confederates hold the town and everything else. Day two, day two is starting. Everybody's waking up in the morning. Hey, I'm alive. You're alive. Great. Um, Lee is feeling really good about himself. But the thing that concerns him is his cavalry corps commander, Stewart, is nowhere to be found. Um, so your cavalry's your eyes and ears. Lee does not have his eyes or his ears. He can't. All he can see is what is directly in front of him. He does not know where the rest of the Federal Army is. He assumes they're coming up the road, but he has no idea. They could be flanking him. They could be coming up on his rear. He has no idea. So Lee comes up with a plan. We're going to attack both flanks. We're going to attack the actual hook, and we're going to attack the bottom of the hook, of the fish hook. He sends his number two man, James Longstreet, who he calls his warhorse,
Gosh, I
Longstreet.
love Tom Merringer in that movie. He was so
Oh yeah.
cool.
Other than his beard melting off, he was great. But that's not his fault. It was 90 something degrees and humid in Gettysburg at the time.
I didn't realize that, man. That's
Oh,
crazy.
again, that just watching a movie a historical movie with a historian or somebody interested in that time period, it's my wife hates watching Civil War or history movies with me, and I'm sure Greg has his whole family hates watching stuff with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Uh,
bet
you
I'm
know,
actually gonna. My wife is actually. I think I asked my wife the other day if she would watch Gettysburg, like in like two chunks, I guess you could say.
yeah,
And she actually agreed to it. So we'll see what she thinks about
yeah.
it. That's
You
pretty
make sure you
interesting.
write that down and
Yeah,
cash that check.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, and put it in the bank.
Yeah.
I if you're just tuning in, this is our special guest Nick Pouliot. We're talking about the Battle of Gettysburg and the paranormal fallout we're going to get into in the next hour. Here we're coming up. We're about 10 minutes out from uh, the end of the first hour. Let's wrap. Let's finish this up. As far as what happened in the battle, because you've got. I think this is you're doing a good job setting this up
Yep.
for the meat and bones of what we're going to talk about in the next hour.
hmm
Go ahead.
So day two starts. Lee tells Longstreet, "You're going to hit the right, the Union, or well, our right, the Union left." Um, Longstreet does not want to attack. He says, we can fall back and hold the high ground, Longstreet has always been a defensive guy. He's well ahead of his time. Um, he's like, we can pull back, we can hang on, and make them attack us. If they have to attack us, then they're more likely to lose troops. We force them to make the move that we want them to make. So Longstreet delays his attack until the afternoon, and then that's where you have these famous places. Any part of the battlefield is famous, but you have Little Round Top, Big Round Top, Devil's Den, the Wheat Field, Peach Orchard, Cemetery Ridge, and so Longstreet attacks, and it goes exceedingly well until it doesn't. Um, it goes really well because a federal corps commander Sickles moved his entire corps a full mile ahead of where he was supposed to be in the line. So now there's a mile-long gap in your line, which is not good. So Longstreet is able to expose that. He crushes most of the Third Corps, and the Second Corps, who I mentioned earlier, is the sledgehammer of the army. Essentially, has to be sent in to plug these holes. Well, if you're trying to plug a hole so guys can retreat, usually that means you're not coming out. There's several units actually, but one unit was virtually completely decimated. The 1st Minnesota, they bumped into General Hancock, who commanded their corps, and he said to their colonel, "Take those colors." Well, the colors he pointed to were an entire brigade of Confederates. His regiment was less than 200 men at the time, and Hancock told him, "Go take those flags from about at least 1,000 men more." But he told them to do that because he needed them to delay the Confederate attack for all they had to do was delay them for 5 minutes, just for the rest of the units to come up and to be able to secure a line. Um, I think like I said, about 200 guys went in and maybe 40 came out. The rest were dead or extremely wounded on the field. But they were able to hold off the Confederate advance, that portion of the advance, long enough for other units to come up and start plugging the holes, plugging the line, and to be able to push the Confederates back off. So we've got Little Round Top, that's the very extreme left. Watch the movie. It does a very good job. One thing it doesn't note, and it gives credence to the Confederates, those guys have been fighting all day. They were not fresh troops that were running up this hill now. These guys have been fighting all day, and most of them were almost out of ammunition by the time they attacked.
Yeah, I remember that part when they're on top of that little these boulders, and they were literally fighting like guerrilla style, pretty much. It was some really intense combat in that part of the movie. I remember that.
Yeah, and it's one thing to be told, all right, go fight these guys, but all right, now go up this hill, and Little Round Top is a big hill, but you're running out of ammo. You're going uphill, and you have no water. You probably haven't had water for 2-3 hours. So, and it's hot. I can't remember where the statistics were found, but somebody was keeping track of the weather in the area. It was probably about 85 degrees, and it's Pennsylvania in the summer. It's going to be humid. So these guys were thirsty, and they've been fighting all day. So eventually, to sum it all up very shortly, very quick, Longstreet attacked late. He was able to make a lot of gains, but by the end of the day, the Confederates fall back to their positions that they held from day one at the end of the first day. That night, early morning, Jeb Stuart, Cavalry Corps commander for the Confederates, finally shows back up. Lee is like, "Where the F have you been?" And Southern honor and all this. Stuart goes to give up his position. Lee says, "We don't have time for this. You have a job to do. I have a job to do. Let's do our job." And by this time, most of the Federal Army is in Gettysburg at the time. There is the 6th Corps, who is not. Those poor bastards, they ran 35 miles. They show up after the battle's over. And they lost a couple hundred guys due to heat stroke just making that march.
I bet.
And they busted their ass to get up there. And
sure.
Unfortunately, in a way, they didn't get in the fight, but less of them died because they didn't get in the fight. So day 3 begins. Lee has this, we'll call it an epiphany, I guess, and says, we've attacked them on their left and their right, so and they've reinforced those positions. So now their weakest position is going to be the center of the line. In theory,
Right.
that's correct, except for the fact that they took the injured units that had fought all day and put them in the middle. Now, wounded or not, you're going to fight for your life in these situations. So, Pickett's division under Longstreet's corps had just shown up the night before, so they're the freshest division in the Confederate Army. So we now know it as Pickett's Charge. It really should not be named Pickett's Charge because Pickett did not have the most troops in the engagement, but he's the one that unfortunately it is named after. Um, it was Pettigrew or Pender, I can't remember which one, because there's all these P's, had more troops, so there's been an argument it should be named after him. But, after 160 years, kind of hard to change stuff like that. So, Pickett it is. So, you said you and your dad walked it back in 2012.
That's correct. Well, actually,
so,
I didn't. He did.
Oh, he did. Okay.
I didn't get to go with him.
Okay. So,
I wish I did.
the Confederate line, where it is at the time, it is a mile march in a straight line to the Federal line. And most of the Federals are behind a stone wall at this point. They're not on a hill, but they're at a stone wall. Stone wall is protection, very similar to Fredericksburg. So there's a cannonade that begins. There's something like 160 cannons that are fired. And it
I
goes
remember
on for,
that part in the movie. I remember
yeah,
I had butterflies when that started. I had butterflies as a 13-year-old.
yep,
I remember, like, man, I knew something incredible, even just really powerful, was fixing to happen.
yeah. And I mean that is the largest cannonade in North America that ever happened. It goes on for a couple hours. The idea was for the Confederate artillery to knock out the Federal artillery and start breaking up the infantry. It didn't really do anything. They actually tended to shoot high and over the Federal artillery and infantry, but they thought that they knocked out the Federal artillery because there was not as much fire coming back at them. What had happened was the Federals knew, well, we can probably hit them, but they're probably going to attack. So why are we going to send all this artillery at them? They pulled their batteries back. They fell back with them to make the Confederates think, yeah, they're knocking them out, or we're just going to hang back. So after a couple hours, Lee orders the advance. Longstreet orders the advance. There's said that he just grunts or waves his hand or nods. Either way, the attack begins. Approximately 12 to 15,000 Confederates come out of this tree line and start their march a mile across an open field. If you know anything about tactics, whether Revolutionary, Civil War, modern day, a mile over open ground is not the place to be.
No, everything's a sitting duck.
Everything is a sitting duck. So it takes the Confederates some time to get across the field. As soon as they get to the Emmitsburg Road, which is a main road in town, that's one of those 8 or 9 roads that leads into town, they start taking musket fire from guys hiding behind a stone wall, concentrated fire, and then they start taking artillery fire. Because by this point, by the time they get up there, Federal artillery has been wheeled back up, and so now they're firing solid shot. Then they start loading canister. Canister is essentially a giant shotgun shell, and what's even worse to that is you can load double canister. So you can have 2 sets of these tubes that are just full of metal, and you fire
Wow.
those suckers off, and you can have a line of guys like this, and then the middle of the line is gone. Just boom, gone. There's nothing left of those guys. The Confederates end up, some of them do make it to the stone wall, and they do penetrate the stone wall, but and they only hold it maybe 10, 15 minutes at the most. There's several acts of bravery. Lieutenant Cushing, he received the Medal of Honor. He is on one of the batteries at the stone wall. He's firing his gun as much as he can. He's ended up killed while firing his gun. the Confederates take this position, and then they are very relatively quickly pushed back, and then they retreat back a mile again over open field. Um, I don't know, to be honest with you, if while they were retreating they were being shot at, whether by musket or artillery, because you just had hand-to-hand combat. You're probably going to need to take a break and all right, they're beat, they're retreating, they're obviously not organized. We don't need to worry about it. Um, but that essentially ends the Battle at Gettysburg. But while that Pickett's charge is happening, Stuart was sent all the way around the Federal Army to come and attack in the middle. So they were going to pincer the Federal middle. And if you've heard of this man named George Armstrong Custer,
Yes.
General Custer and his Wolverines, his 7th Michigan, and I can't remember the other Michigan unit, he sees Stuart coming in from the rear. He grabs the 2 closest cavalry units to him, and he charges them. Custer is big on glory, even back then, and he's big on charges. Charges are really bad for cavalry. Nobody ends up coming out of it in good shape. He charges and he halts the Confederate advance there, because if Stuart had been able to hit either before, during, after, that he would have been able to help sever that line. But he is held off long enough for more cavalry units to show up, and then he is eventually pushed back as well. Lee comes back. He's licking his wounds. It starts to rain the night of July 3rd into the July 4th, Independence Day. And during that time, during the rain, he retreats and starts to head back home to Virginia. And he walked in with about 70,000. Let me check my numbers. He walked in to the beginning of the battle, day one, with about 70,000 troops. He's probably down to at least 50,000, 45,000 at this point.
Wow. That's a massive loss.
Yeah. Um, the total Americans lost is 56,000. There's 56 something
In 3 days.
in
In
3 days of
3
fighting.
days. Wow.
Vietnam, 56,000 Americans. Vietnam was how many years? 10, 11, 12?
Something like that. Yeah.
Forever.
It kind of ended. They kind of wrapped that conflict up in like 72, I think, completely wrapped it up in 71,
Yeah.
72, 73. My dad was in the Navy during all that.
Okay.
But he was in the Cold. He was actually he was involved in the Cold War clandestine ops and a nuclear submarine. So.
Okay. All right.
It brings us. We're actually at the top of the end of the hour. Let's take a short break. But when we come back, I want to go let you finish talking about this, and then I want to go into the paranormal fallout that obviously has ensued afterwards, and give Greg some time to organize his thoughts and see if he has anything to add to this.
Yeah.
But you're listening to What Lies Beyond with our special guest, Nick Pouliot. And we are talking about the haunted history of Gettysburg. And we will be back in just a few minutes. All right. Break. All right, man. We're just going to give it another minute or two and wait for everyone to uh, get into the back with us. And I want to highlight a few chats real quick. Big new, a friend of mine who I'm keeping her identity private for now. Big news going down at Fort Bragg soon. I can't wait to hear about that. And I will make in the future, whenever she feels safe to do so, we will talk about that here on the program. My dad, he made some comments here. I knew a descendant of General Imboden who generally assigned command of the wagon trail carrying Confederate wounded back to Virginia. Wow, that's
Wow.
cool. And then he went on to say, as in for General Imboden founded the town of Damascus, Virginia. Wow, I've been hiking on the AT with my dad up through there. That's pretty interesting. Thank you, Dad. Appreciate that. Um,
Yeah, I never even heard of that general, so that's pretty cool.
yeah, yeah. My dad, he's quite knowledgeable about the Civil War and Revolutionary War. I think more so the Civil War. But absolutely, we'll wait for Greg to come back in.
Yeah.
Um, really appreciate everybody. Let's see here. Hang on just a minute. Let's see. I think he's having some technical issues. There we go. He's back. He's back and better than ever.
Another year older.
Oh, he made a correction. Dad made a correction. He said wagon train. Uh, so,
Okay.
at any rate, thank you, Dad. I appreciate that. I'm glad you're tuning in tonight too. My dad's my hero. He's awesome. I get a lot of the I inherited a lot of the best aspects of his personality and whatnot and his moral compass, and I'm really thankful that Dad tuned in tonight. He also said, let's see, I think the wagon train was 12 miles long. Imagine
Yeah,
how
something
many
like that.
wounded that contained. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
absolutely.
no small number for sure.
All right, man. We are back and we are live here at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. And you're listening to What Lies Beyond and our special guest, Nick Pouliot. And we were, before we went to break, we were talking and discussing in detail the events prior to and the tragic and horrible 3-day battle and pivotal battle in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And Greg, did you have anything you wanted to roll in before we get into some other aspects of the haunted history of this? Or
No, I think I've been.
I think you're really your audio is very very dim. It's very low.
Yeah, these headsets are not very good.
Let's see if I can.
I had to
Hang
do
on
the
just a minute.
the stereo on my laptop. But, no, everything Nick has covered has been very good things thus far. Um, very interesting listening to all 3 days of the battle. No,
Hey Greg, I'm sorry to interrupt you, buddy. We can't hear anything you're saying. It's very like we can barely hear you. Like it's really low. You might want to adjust your microphone volume a little bit.
okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this thing's not working very well.
Um, if you want to, you can until you figure that out. You can actually add it to your chat. You can add it to the chat if you'd like, because I'd like to hear what you were going to say. Let's see here. See if I can't really adjust it anymore on my end. Um, let's see. There we go. I'm so sorry, brother. I can't. We just if you want to use the chat until till you get this figured out, you will. And then I'd like to hear. I really want to hear what your comments. But until you get that figured out, let's continue if that's okay, gentlemen.
Mhm.
You know, we're always going to have technical hiccups and this and that, so that's just part of life. At any rate, so Nick, can you just to jog my memory,
Mhm.
in our memory, you said that there was a grand total of like what 53,000,
56,000.
56,000. Okay,
56,000.
wow, that's a
Killed,
lot of
wounded,
deaths.
captured, or missing. So after the battle, after the battle, after a battle, things don't just magically disappear and go back to normal. There is corpses laying around for miles. There's guns. There's explosives, unexploded shells. Um, People still die after the battle because they walk into a shell, or somebody plays with a gun. The gun is loaded and bang. Um, you know, just like even nowadays, modern day with mines and any unexploded ordnance, anything like that. Um, so later on, Meade does not follow up on his attack on Lee because he's like, we are beat up and bloodied as well. It's almost a 50-50 split between the casualties. Confederates take about 5,000 more, but it's a fairly even split. Meade decides not to pursue right away. Lincoln doesn't like this, but he lets it go. In November, a portion of the battlefield is dedicated to become a national cemetery. Um, the very famous Gettysburg Address, everybody has to learn in school. That's where this comes from. Um, and at the time, it is only for um, federal dead. There's no Confederate dead in there. So the Confederate dead are all in mass graves, if they're even in a mass grave, all throughout the battlefield. Um, so, getting into the paranormal aspect, there's just bodies lying around. Bodies have been moved, disturbed, to move them into the federal cemetery. Eventually, the women of Richmond are able to start raising money per body that is dug up to be sent back home to Richmond to be buried. Um, Eventually, they run out of money, and all these bones that they've collected. If you go into the Richmond, I think it's the Hollywood Cemetery down there. That is where there's a mass tomb where they just took all these bones and they just dumped them in.
Wow.
So, brothers are with their brothers, fathers, uncles, brothers in arms are together. At least that's one way to look at it. But, you know, there were guys, they knew who this guy was, and they ran out of money, so they dumped him in with everybody else, which, like I said, he's with his brothers in arms, but it's very unfortunate that happened.
I
Um,
agree. Regardless of what side of the battle they were on, the war rather, it's sad that not everybody got the basic dignity of having an appropriate burial. And at the end of the day, I truly believe that the Union won righteously, and at least in the aspect of freeing the slaves. I think slavery is just an evil, an abomination.
oh yeah.
Um, but at any rate, I want to preface with this, since you mentioned that. I remember, I grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries, like a lot of people have, in the mid 80s through the early 90s when Robert Stack was the host of it. And me and dad, mom, I remember we would every Sunday or Monday night, we would, the show would air. And I remember they did a segment on Gettysburg. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in that segment was there was a situation where two ladies were in a building, and they were in an elevator. They were leaving. I guess they were employees. They were leaving for the day, and the elevator seemed to malfunction, and we're get and the when that happened, um, uh, the elevator went straight to the basement, and when the elevator opened, um, it they saw full, like it was just like the room down there, the basement was full of apparitions, like full body apparitions, like
Mm.
people having their legs amputated, limbs amputated. Uh, and then at one point, the one of the soldiers stopped and looked them directly in the eye. Um, that's what really got me interested in the paranormal side of this situation.
Hmm.
But Nick, you have actually had some. You've been to Gettysburg and you've had some funky things happen to you. And was it your brother?
Yeah, me and my brother. So I vaguely remember this, um, and I have a very poor memory, anyways. But we were there. It was after the first night we were there. And, we'd done the battlefield or parts of it, and um, we hadn't watched the movie Gettysburg yet, I don't think. Um, so I with anything and everything, historian, you always want multiple sources, do your own investigating. So I always try and keep an open mind about things. And my mom, she tells us a story every once in a while. She says, we woke up in the morning and everything was fine. And I do remember hearing it sounded like somebody walking up the stairs, because there was an attic that was locked. We weren't allowed to go into it, and it was a house we were renting, so not atypical by any means. Um, and it was like an older house, obviously, so it was a little spooky to me being 12. But sounded like
Sure.
somebody was walking up in the attic. It could have been somebody shifting in the bed, and then the whole house moves. My mom says we woke up in the morning, and I went up to her and I said, "Oh, did you hear the people shouting and the guns and the cannons going off last night?" She said, "No." And then later on, my middle brother went up to her and said the same thing. And we weren't near each other when we talked to her about it, so he didn't hear me say anything. I didn't hear him. She's like, "Well, that's really weird. You know, the two of them don't usually make things up, so maybe we heard something." Um, and it's not like people were going around in the middle of June, July, running around with their muskets and firing them off and screaming. Like, we probably would have heard something, or somebody else would have heard something. Um, but my mom also had her own experience while we were there. Um,
Wow.
so my brother, great grandmother, and I were in the living room, and my dad, and my baby brother, he was about 5 or 6, were in the one of the bedrooms, and my mom remembers she's a very light sleeper. Um, she felt somebody poking her on the side. Now,
Oh
you've
my
got
gosh,
you've got
really?
an 11-year-old, you've got a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So, okay, somebody's poking me. It's one of the three kids, right?
Right.
So she rolls over like any mother would do and looks around. There's nothing. It's pitch black, but you can generally tell if your kid is there. I don't have my own kid, but like
Right.
you know when somebody is there.
You feel they're present. You can feel a
Right.
presence.
You can
Yeah.
hear them breathing because they're 6 years old. Um, Nothing. So she's like, okay, maybe I was I dreamt it. Rolls back over, happens again. Poke, poke, poke. But then she also hears mommy, and so she rolls over again, and she's like, okay, what is this? And grew up very French Irish Catholic. So my mom says, I don't know what the hell this is. I don't know who you are, but I just want to go to sleep. And then that was it. She didn't get poked again. Um, but she got up after that and looked around and she checked him on the baby. He was 6. Um, he was dead asleep. And my brother, my great grandmother, and I were dead asleep. So there was, in, like I said, old house. You would have heard somebody walking. So my mom was like, I'll go back anytime, but I'm not staying in that same house because I want to sleep. Um, and I mean, that's just two people, myself and my brother, and my mom. Um, we did a ghost tour, and I don't know if it was supernatural or not, but they were talking about we were under this walnut tree, and there used to be a house there apparently, and there was some Confederate sharpshooters, and so they're talking about the sharpshooters, and then a walnut fell and smacked me on the head. And I was like, all right, is this just perfect timing? I'm sitting under a walnut tree, or is there something else to it? Um, Quite possible it could have been, could have not, but um, definitely my mom being poked and multiple times, like I said, and hearing mommy, and then the three of us were dead asleep was like, okay, there's definitely something. Um, don't know what, but there's something going on right there at least.
Wow, that's crazy, man. That's kind of spooky.
Yeah.
That's very consistent with things that we've. I'll tell you what I've heard.
Hmm.
I'll tell you some things, and I have some hypotheses that I want to share with Greg and yourself. Um, First of all, I'll preface with this. I think that there is anywhere between one and three of things happening in that area. I'll, Number one, I've studied parapsychology for about 20 years.
Mm.
For those who aren't familiar with that term, parapsychology is the study of psychic phenomenon and hypnosis, by definition. That includes a lot of different things. It includes precognition, or any types of clairvoyant phenomenon. It includes death survival, ghosts, near-death experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And then and then there's so I think that there's some parapsychology going on here, um, in the sense that some hauntings, from what I've learned over the years, I believe are what they call residual. Ghost hunters call residual hauntings. In other
Hmm.
words, it's more or less like a recording, and the fact that embedded in time, um, and so you're seeing there's no rhyme or reason behind it. You're just like you're watching a movie, like a loop, uh, and I believe it's connected to the fourth dimension. I really believe that. I've had some guests on my show who are parapsychologists who we've talked about that at length on when we were doing Project Stargate Fringe research. The second thing is uh, possibility is that some of this phenomenon is actually uh, 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 non-corporeal, disembodied human spirits. Now, there's a lot of evidence, stories I've heard about Gettysburg that points towards that uh, possibility. And like one of the Jason, I think his name's Jason, the guy who Jason that founded Ghost Hunter, the show Ghost Hunters. I can't remember his
Hmm.
last name. Um, he when one time he was he was driving through Gettysburg, and they panned their camera over, and they saw what looked like a platoon of soldiers marching, and then all of a sudden, boom, gone. Um, I That right there is kind of looks. I would think that that's probably more a residual situation, uh, like a residual haunting. There's also been people who have also experienced what seems like a interactive dialogue with sometimes full body apparitions. I remember heard a testimony of a reenactor who was hanging out. It was at night, and he some guy walks up to him, and he smelled terrible. He he said something that he said something to the effect like he was trying to find his unit or whatever, um, and this guy just kind of disappeared, like he just vanished. I mean, there's no time for this guy to hit the deck, hide, or anything. This dude just vanished. So a lot of people, a lot of people have reported phenomenon that seems to kind of go in those directions. Now, there's a third kind of haunting, um, and I think that there could be some of this going on. I can't prove it or disprove it, any of this really, but um, there's also what I call diabolical hauntings, and what I mean by that is the places that have a lot of tragedy. Um, Sometimes we've learned that it attracts uh, diabolical entities that they're probably not human, that very well may not be human. Maybe they're angelic in nature, maybe they're this or that, but at the end of the day, that's also a possibility. But a lot of the phenomenon that I've heard of seems to fall into the category of the first two, um, especially the first one. I think there's a heck of a lot of that stuff going on. The uh, residual or parapsychological phenomenon on that end.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'll jump in with another one, Mark. I know somebody who he would see and hear things often at battlefields, and this isn't just in general. Doesn't have to be Gettysburg. Anywhere battle or anything happened, human tragedy. This can happen anywhere, I would say, but Gettysburg, obviously, the large amount of people that were there. But I heard him. He told me one time he was in near the wheat field in Gettysburg, which is where there was some heavy fighting. The wheat field exchanged hands 3 to 4 times during the day on day two, and the Irish Brigade fought in that area. The Irish Brigade, a lot of them were Irish immigrants fresh off the boat. Some of them have been here for a little bit, but so many of them would have spoke Gaelic or could have said some words in Gaelic
Mm-hmm.
on their battle flags. This is could be horrible Gaelic pronunciation, or even an attempt said something along the lines of "Falabala," which means, I believe, to your spears or There's it's a battle cry. Falabala. Sometimes people here in that area, fa la 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 la, like a Christmas jingle.
Right.
But you start putting two and two together, maybe they're hearing a residual sound or an echo of these Irishmen charging in or going into battle, yelling their battle cry, which, if you don't know Gaelic or you're hearing it, echoes never sound perfect. You may be
Right.
hearing them call it out. So there's definitely stuff like that all around.
Wow. I've heard of things like that too. The sounds of weapons firing, that's been reported, I believe, and to some degree. Greg, if you have any comments, if you haven't had a chance to have been able to fix your audio issues, please feel free to post a comment on the chat, and we can discuss that. I'm sorry you're having problems, man. Um, but at any rate, the this kind of phenomenon has been reported not just in Gettysburg. I've heard that Kennesaw. I've heard Greg, in the chat, or have have you heard anything about anything like any of this type of phenomenon happening in Kennesaw? Because I know you've been to Kennesaw.
Right. I don't know if you can hear me very well. I used to
Barely hear you.
I know there's just issues with this headphone.
It's okay, man. We'll figure it out. We'll fix that. It's after the podcast.
Okay, but yeah, I've heard of stories of people smelling blood or gunpowder. I've had one instance where I actually was walking one trail and I always felt like there was like a horde of people behind me. This was just a very odd phenomenon I had, but not as much as Gettysburg, because Gettysburg just has that reputation. I had a co-worker of mine who actually was at Cemetery Ridge one time, and she said she had a feeling of absolute dread just wave over her at one point. She said she didn't know why.
So just to repeat, I want to kind of repeat some of the stuff you said. So for those of you who can't hear them, I apologize also for our audio issues. We're definitely working on getting all this taken care of. What Greg has, I know he's been my friend here. He's been to Kennesaw battlefield in Georgia, and he's had situations where he's felt a presence with them, and had some other wacky experiences there. And I know you've been there. You've been there a number of times, correct?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I volunteered there for I think at least 2 years.
You volunteered there also. I know you did. You've done some reenacting work yourself, and some other types of work that's related to these things. But at any rate, I really think that this is not it's definitely not confined to the Gettysburg battlefield. I think a lot of battlefields where the Revolutionary War, even where the Revolutionary War battles took place in some other places, um, uh, have some paranormal phenomenon. Um, there's even speaking of Revolutionary War, there's a story about some people. I can't remember the individuals involved. They were on the Potomac River, and they are on this boat, and they're going somewhere. Obviously, they go under a bridge and they see a UFO, well, for lack of a better term, and it's a very bright object. And they said that what should a journey that should have took them like 30 minutes took 3 hours. That sounds very suspicious of like a missing time like experience. Uh, there's a lot more paranormal history than a lot of people are aware of, and that's something I definitely want to talk about, Greg, in the future with uh, moving forward on what lies beyond. But Nick, do you did you? I want to give you an opportunity before we close out to give some final remarks. I want to give you that opportunity, and thank you so much for being with us again. Um, I'll let you make some remarks before we close out.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm very happy to be here. This was a lot of fun. When Greg texted me, "Hey, you're into the Civil War. You want to be on a podcast?" I was like, "Sure." Definitely didn't know what I was getting into, but that's not a bad thing by any means. I was like, "All right." I showed up to this little podcast meeting. I'm like, "All right, like this is cool." I was like, I thought at first it was gonna be a history podcast. I'm like, "Well, Greg knows his stuff," and I'm like, "All right, just wants maybe somebody else," but this is really cool. You get to think about uh, other things going on, and maybe all this stuff can be explained one day, and it's not paranormal at all. But who knows? You don't know what you don't know. Um, we'll eventually find out. But I think just with the Battle at Gettysburg, it's extremely pivotal. It's that and Vicksburg are the changing battles, the most important battles of the entire war. Um, Without Gettysburg, Lee, if Lee wins at Gettysburg, historians hate to play the what if game because what if this means it's the multiverse of the MCU. There's billions of different things that could happen, but
Sure.
if Lee takes Washington, war is over. Um, because you capture the president, done. Um, but that's not how it works. General Grant, who becomes future president, future commander of all federal forces, he takes Vicksburg. He was commanded that brilliantly. He landed troops on the other side of the river, surrounds the city from that side, shells it. The people in there were starving. They were living in caves, and that was part of the total war that I mentioned earlier. But Grant, he was nicknamed the Butcher later on, but he was given that name because he knew what he had to do to win. Um, he didn't like it. He was always trying to make up for it afterwards. Um, he always regretted, the deaths, but he's a military general. He has a job
Right.
to do. He knew what he had to do, and he did it. Um, but with taking Vicksburg, we were able to take the rest of the Mississippi, cut the Confederacy in half. We already held New Orleans from the early part of the war, so but by the time we took Vicksburg and Gettysburg, we knew the war was over essentially. It was just how long was it going to take, um, and how many lives are going to be lost at that point, or can the Confederacy hold off long enough for the Brits to get involved? Um, the Brits were mostly pro-Confederacy. They were against slavery, but a weakened United States benefited them greatly. They did not need our cotton anymore. They had Egypt, and they were working on India. I can't remember, timelines are a little off with all that, but they had plenty of cotton. They had all the cotton they wanted. They did not need Southern cotton. Um, but a weakened United States would allow them to feel more secure with Canada and their Caribbean holdings. And then, if you have a new ally in the Confederate States of America, why the hell not have another ally? So things could have gone very differently. Thankfully, they didn't. And
Right.
so everything bleeds into another and comes up to where we are now.
Absolutely, man. Nick, again, I've really enjoyed having you on. I really appreciate everybody who's participated in the chat. Thank you, Dad, and thank you, my friend. We're going to looking forward to hearing more news about Fort Bragg and some other things that we're going to talk about on this program in the future. I'd love to have maybe sometime if you want to, we can come back. You can come back and talk about Vicksburg. Maybe we can talk about that because that's an interesting battle as well.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
sure.
I'll definitely do some homework on that. And you're always welcome. Once you come in, once you're a guest on this program, you're a part of the team. So we enjoy I've really enjoyed having you. And Greg, thank you for your efforts and work to make this possible. I really appreciate it, man. But yeah, definitely, you're welcome. You have an open door to come back anytime.
All right.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. We'll just get Greg a better headset.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Or
we're gonna get.
plug him in.
I apologize to everybody for the audio issues, but we'll get that squared away in that way because I'm sorry, Greg, that you didn't get to participate so much in the as much as you wanted to in the dialogue. But anyway, this has been a real pleasure. This is What Lies Beyond with our special guest, Nick Pouliot, and we will see you very soon. I'll make an announcement when our next broadcast will be, and I hope all of you have a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, or to all of you around the world, and good night. God bless, and thank you for being with us.